Good morning again, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green here in New York alongside Ian Lee, who is in the UK with us. Hey, Ian, there you are. We are watching the first of 2 days of ceremonies commemorating the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the beginning of the end of World War II. We are expecting the president to be arriving shortly. I believe the Queen has already arrived. And what you're looking at right here is Portsmouth, England. This is where many of the troops launched their endeavor towards the northern shore of France, German-occupied France, and where the D-Day landing in Normandy began. And so the ceremonies are about to begin in about 15 minutes or so. But Ian, you're standing by in London. There are a number of things planned today. A number of world leaders are going to be here representing the Allied forces who participated in D-Day. What can you tell me about what's going to be happening today?
Well, that's right. You have 16 world leaders that are going to be at this ceremony. They represent the 16 countries that participated in D-Day. And I think for a lot of people, when we think of D-Day, we think of the Brits, we think of the Americans, but there were a lot of other people. A lot of these people were from countries that were conquered by the Nazis, and they fled to the UK and they participated there. So we're also going to see leaders from Canada, Australia, what was then Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic nowadays, France, Norway, and Poland, and they're going to be there to commemorate this day. This is a 75th anniversary is a momentous occasion to mark, because you go back 75 years ago today, a lot of people were anxious about whether this would actually succeed in invading Normandy, France. So today we're going to have those ceremonies commemorating it. We're also likely to hear from Prime Minister Theresa May to say that that unity that we saw back then is still very much important today to move forward to ensure stability, security, and peace in the world.
Yeah, that is a theme that we've heard repeated over the past few days, with the president enjoying an official state visit to the UK. Both Theresa May and him repeating in several speeches about the special relationship that the UK shares with the US. And I want to talk a little bit about what's been unfolding over the past few days, but I also want to just, right before we get to that, kind of highlight what to expect today. As I understand it, there are 300 World War II veterans who are participating in the 2 days of commemorations. They range in age from 91 to 101. If you do the math, 91, we're talking about a 16-year-old kid.
That's right. And actually, a lot of people back in those days, they would lie about their age so they could fight. It was a patriotic duty to fight in World War II. You didn't want to be seen as left behind. And so you did have a lot of people lying about their age. And so you do get some people in their early 90s, but then you have people who are over 100 years old, and really everyone wanted to participate in the war effort. And, really fortunate to have people who fought in that war there today, because they're getting old, and, not many of them will live to, none of them will live to see the 100th anniversary. So It is good to have this one last hurrah for them.
Yeah, it's remarkable that they have been able to gather that many veterans from World War II. And as I understand it, that after participating in the ceremonies today, they'll then move on to Normandy, just like they did 75 years ago. And just to sort of remind people, this is the day before D-Day. This is the location at which thousands of troops sort of launched, heading to northern France. It was key that it happened when it did. They needed the cooperation of the tides and the moon, and they really had very little wiggle room. They couldn't sort of put it off for another day. The weather did not participate. The winds did not participate. Many of these troops did not land on the shores of Normandy in the location that they expected to. And when they did, what they sort of jumped into was, you'll hear many veterans say, just true hell. They landed on beaches that were mined. Many didn't even make it out of the water, some drowning before they hit the shore. It really was an unbelievable sacrifice that many of these young men undertook. And it would take a while. D-Day was the beginning of the end, but it would take a few months until the war was officially over, Ian.
You know, funny that you should mention the weather, because I was looking at the weather this morning, and it does look nicer than it was 75 years ago when they were disembarking for Normandy. You know, I was recently, a couple weeks ago in Normandy on those beaches, on Omaha Beach, and you can see some of those pillboxes where German machine gunners were sitting there waiting for the soldiers to come on shore. You can see how difficult it would be to, once you hit those beaches, to also climb up those sandy hills and try to beat back the Germans and capture that ground. You know, it wasn't ensured that it was going to be a success. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the general in charge of Operation Overlord, he actually had two speeches prepared, one for success and one for failure. He wasn't sure that this was going to succeed, and if he didn't, he was going to have to face the public and say why it didn't succeed. There was a lot of smoke and mirrors leading up to this too. They had to convince the Germans that they were going to land elsewhere. So a lot went into this behind the scenes to prepare the way for these soldiers, tens of thousands of soldiers, to not only storm the beaches of Normandy, but also the parachutes, the troops, the airborne that jumped in behind the lines to help confuse the situation, block roads so that the Germans couldn't send reinforcements to the beaches and stop this invasion. So a lot had to go into play, and like you said, it was chaos. There were troops that landed on the wrong beaches, there were troops who landed in the wrong places, the airborne troops, and so a lot went wrong, but a lot went right because they were able to capture Normandy, and that was what they needed to then push further into Europe and liberate Europe from the Nazis.
Right. So just to let people know what we're looking at right now, we're looking at the Royal Guard and the Royal Navy. That's who we see marching right there. Some of these troops actually just finished their training on Friday. And as the camera sort of pans around at the dignitaries, you will have seen Emmanuel Macron, Theresa May, also as well as the President and the First Lady already arrived and waiting in the stands for the ceremonies to officially start. As I understand it, Ian, we will be hearing from the President as well as from Emmanuel Macron of France and Pierre Trudeau of Canada.
Yeah, we're expecting to hear from these world leaders to talk about the sacrifice. Really, this day is about the sacrifice of those men who went on those shores. And like we said, from Theresa May, we're expecting that continued bond between those countries to say that let's not have that sacrifice be in vain.
Not to interrupt you, we just showed Justin Trudeau, and I said Pierre Trudeau, who is his father, who is also a former Prime Minister of Canada, but I just want to correct that. It's Justin Trudeau. Sorry, continue.
Yes, Justin Trudeau, yes. Again, this will a lot be about the sacrifice that these men made. And so we will hear from these world leaders speeches likely talking about that sacrifice, especially from Emmanuel Macron, because D-Day happened in France, Normandy, and it was so instrumental. Also the French resistance played such a crucial role in helping ensure that the landings on the beaches were successful by disrupting the German supply lines, the communication. So a lot went into play. So you possibly have Emmanuel Macron talking about their role as well. But yes, so many people have sacrificed 75 years ago today, and just remembering walking through that graveyard on Normandy where you see the rows and rows of white headstones, it's a sombering experience to see, physically be there and see the sacrifice that was made by those troops on that day.
Yeah, in fact, sort of an exact number of troops who were killed during this operation, that's sort of still unknown. We know thousands, but it's really difficult to know exactly how many. We saw Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, as well.